This is a story of a river guide who was swallowed whole by a hippopotamus twice. The hippo spat him out, then swallowed him again, but he survived. Zimbabwe is not a country that asks you to be comfortable. It asks you to be present, to pay attention, to read the land, to understand that everything out there, from the thorn bush to the river, operates on its own terms and not yours. Paul Templar understood this from childhood. He had grown up in the bush country, absorbing its rhythms and its rules the way children absorb language, not consciously, not from books, but through the skin, through the soles of bare feet on red earth, through years of watching and listening, and making mistakes small enough to survive. He was born around 1968, the son of a family rooted in Zimbabwe's European settler community, a community that had been present in the country since it was called Rhodesia, and that had watched the country change its name, its flag, and its government in 1980 when independence came and Robert Mugabe's ZANU-PF swept to power. The political transformation was profound and complicated, but the bush did not change. The Zambezi still ran fast and brown toward the sea. The elephants still moved through the Mopine forests in the early morning. The hippos still owned the river, as they always had. Paul grew up near Victoria Falls, one of the great natural spectacles of the world, the point where the Zambezi plunges over a basalt cliff 100 meters high and almost 2 kilometers wide, filling the gorge below with a perpetual roar and a column of mist visible for 30 kilometers. The local Kololo people called it Mosi Oatunya, the smoke that thunders, and the name described it better than the colonial one. Paul grew up with that thunder in his ears, the sound so constant it became part of the landscape of his mind, the way the sound of the sea becomes part of the mind of a child raised on the coast. As a young man, he left Zimbabwe, as many young men from settler families did in the turbulent years following independence. Years of adjustment and uncertainty, of farms changing hands and old certainties dissolving. He joined the British Army, a not uncommon path for Zimbabwean men of his background and generation. The army made him fitter, harder, and more disciplined, gave him a structured relationship with risk that would, in a different context many years later, possibly save his life. He did his time, and he came home. He came home, and Africa hit him all over again. That is the thing about the bush that those who grew up in it always describe. It does not let you go. You can leave it physically, but some part of your nervous system remains calibrated to it, to the smell of rain on dry earth, to the quality of the light at sunrise over the savannah, to the sound of hippos grunting in the dark from the middle of the river. When Paul returned to Zimbabwe in the mid-1990s, he fell back in love with it immediately. The wildlife, the flora, the fauna, the great outdoors, the space, everything about it. He became a river guide. More specifically, he became a canoe safari guide on the Zambezi, one of the most demanding and specialized roles in the African tourism industry. The Zambezi is Africa's fourth longest river, running over 2,500 kilometers from its source in northwest Zambia, all the way to the Indian Ocean on the coast of Mozambique. The stretch near Victoria Falls, the stretch that Paul knew and worked, is wild in both senses of the word. The water moves fast over hidden rocks, through channels that shift with the season, past islands thick with fever trees and Jack Albury. And in the water, submerged for most of the day, their nostrils and eyes barely breaking the surface, live the hippos. The hippopotamus is not an animal that the uninitiated take seriously enough. It does not have the arresting physical drama of a lion or a leopard. It does not have the commanding scale of an elephant. It is, to the casual observer, almost comic, a vast barrel of animal wallowing in the shallows, yawning with the slow contentment of something that has no natural predators and knows it. Tourist photographs of hippos tend toward the affectionate. People find them endearing. This is a dangerous misreading. The hippopotamus is responsible for more human deaths in Africa than almost any other large animal. Estimates suggest around 3,000 people per year, though the true figure is difficult to establish in regions where record keeping is inconsistent. A bull hippo can weigh 4,000 pounds and run at 30 kilometers per hour on land. In the water, it is faster, more agile, and far more aggressive, defending its territory, its stretch of river, its pod, its space, with absolute conviction and no hesitation whatsoever. A hippo's jaw can open to an angle of 150 degrees. Its canine teeth can reach 50 centimeters in length. It can, and occasionally does, bite a small boat clean in half. Paul Templar knew all of this. It was part of his professional knowledge, the foundation of the work he did every day. He had been leading clients down this river for years. He had a feel for the hippos, their territories, their moods, the warning signs that told an experienced guide when to steer wide and when to wait. He was good at this work. Zimbabwe had a rigorous guide certification process, and the guides who passed it took pride in what they knew. Paul was one of the best. He loved it with the kind of love that only comes when your work is also your calling, when the thing you do for money is also the thing that makes you feel most alive. It was idyllic, he would later say. Life was really, really good. He had his apprentices, younger guides he was training up, teaching the river to. Among them were Evans Namasango, a young man of around 25, and another apprentice named Mac. Evans was the one Paul was most invested in. He was attentive, capable, serious about his work, exactly the kind of person who should be out on this river, learning it the way Paul had learned it. Evans reminded Paul of himself, a little. He was proud of what Evans was becoming. The morning of Saturday, 9th of March, 1996, began with an inconvenience. A friend of Paul's, a fellow guide who was supposed to lead a group of tourists down the river that day, had come down with malaria. Malaria is the tax that the African bush levies on those who live and work in it, particularly near water. It comes fast and hard. The fever, the sweats, the sudden inability to function. The friend needed someone to take his place. Paul agreed. Of course he agreed. This was his river. He knew this stretch like the back of his hand. It was someone else's trip in technical terms, but in every practical sense, it was exactly the kind of morning he would have chosen for himself. The group was 10 people in total. Paul, 3 apprentice guides, including Evans and Mac, and 6 clients, 4 Air France crew members, and a German couple who had presumably imagined a rather different holiday. They loaded into their formation. 3 canoes, each carrying 2 clients in the front seats with a guide in the stern, and 1 single-person safety kayak piloted by an apprentice. Paul led from the front. The morning unfolded beautifully. The Zambezi in early March is running high. The rainy season fills it, pushing the water up through the channels and across the floodplains. And the river was wide and brown and powerful. Kingfishers flickered over the surface. African fish eagles turned slow circles overhead. The spray from Victoria Falls, a few kilometers upstream, hung on the horizon like a permanent cloud. The clients were happy. The guides were relaxed. Everything was going the way it was supposed to go. Then Paul spotted the hippos, a pod of about a dozen, spread across a section of river ahead. This was not alarming in itself. You could not paddle the Zambezi without encountering hippos, and Paul had navigated around hundreds of pods over the years. The read was important. Assess their mood, their positioning, the direction they were facing, the composition of the group. A pod with calves was more dangerous than a bachelor group. A bull at the edge of its territory was more dangerous than a cow in deep water. These were the calculations Paul made automatically, the way a driver calculates speed and distance without conscious thought. He read the situation and made the call. Steer wide. Take a channel that would give the pod enough space, keep the group together and quiet and moving. He pulled his canoe into a small side channel to wait for the others to follow, positioning himself to guide them through. What happened next happened fast, the way disasters on water always do. Fast and irreversible, the sequence of events snapping into place before anyone had time to respond. The third canoe had fallen behind. Somewhere in the passage through the channel, the group had stretched and separated, and Evans, in the stern of the trailing canoe, responsible for the 2 clients in his boat, had drifted off the planned line. How it happened was never fully established. The river had its own ideas about where things should go. Suddenly, there was a massive thud, the sound of something very large hitting the underside of a fiberglass hull. The back of the canoe launched into the air. Evans was catapulted out of the stern and into the river. The clients, by some miracle, clung to the canoe and stayed in. Paul saw it all from the channel. The bull hippo, a large male, territorial, agitated by the boats moving through what it considered its water, had hit the canoe from below, the standard hippo attack response to a perceived intruder. Evans was in the water. The hippo was between them. Paul did not hesitate. This was his apprentice. This was his responsibility. He paddled hard across the current, closing the distance, watching Evans surface and reach out a hand toward him. Their eyes met. Their fingertips were almost touching. Paul later described what happened next with the clarity that people sometimes find for moments of extreme violence. The darkness came from below and from everywhere at once. There was no warning, no sound that preceded it. One moment he was reaching for Evans's hand. The next moment, he was inside the animal. The hippo had taken him. Not Evans, Paul. It had come up from beneath the surface and closed its jaws around him, taking him headfirst, swallowing him to the waist. He was inside the animal's mouth, his head and torso engulfed in darkness, his legs outside in the river. The pressure on his chest was immense. Not a crushing pressure exactly, but absolute. The pressure of something so much stronger than a human body that resistance was essentially meaningless. And the smell. He spoke about the smell in every account he ever gave of that day. A terrible, sulfurous smell, like rotten eggs, the smell of the inside of a hippo's mouth, of partially digested vegetation and river water, and something ancient and rank. He was head first, up to his waist, down a hippo's throat, in the dark, underwater, with the sound of his own blood in his ears and the sensation of the animal moving beneath him. He had 38 serious bite wounds. His left arm from the elbow down was being crushed to pulp. His lung was punctured. His Achilles tendon had been torn out. He would lose the arm. He nearly lost everything. But he was not dead yet. And Paul Templar, trained by the British Army, forged by years on the Zambezi, a man who had grown up understanding that this land would not make allowances for you, had not yet decided to stop fighting. The hippo surfaced. It began to shake him, the way a dog shakes a toy, tossing him into the air and dragging him back down toward the riverbed. Blood rose from his body in clouds, he later said. Time stretched and compressed in the way it does when your body understands that it is fighting for its life. He had no idea how long it lasted. Then the jaws opened, and he was out. It was not over. The hippo came back, took him again, released him again. But eventually, impossibly, Paul Templar was floating in the Zambezi River, alive, bleeding from 38 wounds, unable to move his arms, one lung filling with blood, watching the red clouds spreading around him in the brown water. Mac pulled him onto a rock in the middle of the river. The first aid kit was gone, the radio was gone, the gun was gone, all of it lost in the chaos of the attack. Evans was gone. 6 terrified clients sat in 2 remaining canoes with one paddle between them, and Paul lay on the rock with a hole in his back that Mac plugged with cling film from a plate of tourist snacks. It would take 8 hours to get him to a hospital near Bulawayo that could treat him. His left arm would not survive the journey, but he would.